Have you ever wanted to learn how to animate starships in Blender? Of course you have. In this video, we'll be going through the process of creating simple animations so you can start making your sci-fi masterpiece. First, we'll be covering the basics of working with Blender's animation tools, including keyframing and exploring the different handle types. From there, we'll dive into a slightly more advanced technique where we'll use a curve to guide an animation. So, load up Blender, follow along, and don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell as I have more of these sci-fi themed videos on the way. Okay, so this is the scene that we're going to be using. Relatively simple, a couple of spaceships, parented to empties, a sun, and an environment map. So yeah, that's what the rendered result will look like. Pretty funky. But anyway, let's get going. So, first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the second ship there, because we're just going to focus on the first one to begin with. And it's worth noting at this point that this is very much this first section is very much for absolute beginners when it comes to animation. I'm going to be going over all of the basics. So skip ahead, perhaps, if you've done a little bit of animating before. Otherwise, you'll find this rather boring. Cool. So the principle of animation. Let's jump over to the animation tab here. And you'll see a couple of different windows, the viewport, a secondary viewport. I'm not quite sure why that's the default. I'll be changing that in a minute. But for now, let's just focus on this viewport and take a look at what we're doing. So the way animation works is with keyframes. You set a start position, an end position on different frames, and then the frames between those two positions will be the animation from one point to the other. i.e., on frame 1 here, I'm going to lock in a keyframe. So I'm going to press I and then hit location and rotation. So I'm storing its complete position like that. And then I'll jump to the end. I'm 240, thank you. Like so. And we'll just move the ship over here and then create another keyframe. And you can see now the animation jumps between the two. Yeah? Cool. You're done. You can go home now. The tutorial's finished. Right, so what I'm actually going to do for that last frame is I want to move this ship a little bit further. So what I'm doing, I don't know if you noticed, but I've locked the ship to a particular axis. So the way you do that is press G and then either Y, X, or Z. In my case, I want Y, and then I can only move along the one axis. I'm just putting the end position about there. So it's traveling a decent amount. Now, I'll hit location and rotation again, and we've got our two keyframes. Awesome. Now, if I press space, it will do that animation live in the viewport here. So let's press space and see what we get. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but we have an instant problem, and that's that by default, when you create a keyframe, it will smooth the animation. So it's smoothing into the movement there, and then as it comes to the end, the ship slows down as it smooths to the end, which is cool for loads of stuff. A lot of times you want that smoothing, so it doesn't look like a sudden harsh change. However, for this, we just want our ship to be flying in a constant speed, in a constant direction, so that's not really working for us. This is where this panel is going to come in. I don't want this to be a secondary viewport. I want this to be not a timeline, a graph editor, like so. So yeah, click on this little box at the top of the window, and then you can choose, well, it could be anything, but we want graph editor. And then what I'm going to do, we've only actually, even though we've stored the information for the XYZ location and the XYZ rotation, we're actually only animating along the location of the Y-axis, aren't we? So let's just limit visibility to just the Y location. And then we can see our animation represented as a curve. Yeah? And it's at this point you can see this smoothing in and then smoothing out. Yeah? If it were a linear animation, it would just go straight line from there to there. And that's what we want. Now there's a couple of ways you could do this. You could grab the handles and try and make it roughly straight, like that. Or you could try, I suppose you could scale these points down to 0. And that would, oh no, that didn't work. That would also give you a straight line, but there's a better way. So let's just undo what I've just done. Get our original back. The easiest way is make sure that your keyframes are both selected. You can hold down Shift to select multiple ones. And then on this timeline bit here, press I. No. Press V, sorry, my mistake. Press V. And then change the handle type to vector. But before I click it, keep watching the curves, because as I click it, bang, exactly straight. And now when I press play, let's jump back to the beginning, the ship's traveling at a constant speed. Yeah? Perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now, just to make the animation a little bit more interesting, we're going to slightly change what we've done here. So going back to frame 1, I'm going to press R to rotate, and then I'm going to press Y again to lock it to the Y-axis. It's rotating around the Y-axis. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of starboard rotation at frame 1. I'm going to update the keyframe now by pressing location and rotation. And then we'll jump to the end frame. And for this one, now you'll notice, do you notice the rotation's gone? And that's because when we created this keyframe, we recorded location and rotation. So now the ship's returning to its original rotation because we recorded that. But I want to override that. So I'm going to rotate this one just a little bit to port. Rotation, I, and then rotation. So now our animation, it starts a bit leaning starboard and ends a bit leaning port, like so. A little bit more interesting. Awesome. We're almost done with the basics now. So what do we need to be able to see our ship in a render? We need a camera. So Shift A, camera, and then what I'm going to do, just center my view on this, just pick a rough starting point for the camera. I might actually jump over to rendered view for a moment here, just so we can see how things are going to look. Come on. Do I want to go from that side? That side's going to be more interesting, isn't it? So let's go and press Control Alt number 0, and that will lock the camera to the view that you've currently got. So there we go. So that's going to be roughly our starting point. Now, from camera view, if you want to sort of dolly the camera out, is dolly the right word? I don't know. Move the camera out, not zoom out, but move it. You press G, middle mouse button, and then up and down. And that allows you to move the camera back. So we're just going to get it kind of in shot like that. And then I'm going to actually do nothing. I'm not going to create any keyframes because we're going to use a constraint. Now, constraints are kind of like modifiers, but for modifying animation rather than objects. Kind of the easiest way to look at it. So let's take a look at one in particular called a damped track. Now, what that will do is allow you to pick an object. In my case, I'm going to use, for now, I'm going to use the main empty. And with that object selected, you'll now notice I can't see anything. And that's because the camera is now pointing straight down. And that's just to do with what axis we've got picked here. And the correct one for this would be -Z. So now the camera's pointing directly at the sort of the middle of this empty. And as the animation proceeds, you'll see the camera follows it without me having to animate the camera whatsoever, which is awesome. Now, it doesn't mean you can't. If I were to delete that for a second, you can certainly do a rotation keyframe on the camera and then jump to the last frame and kind of pan it around and create another keyframe. But yeah, it has its own issues, especially if you're doing something a little bit more complex than it flying in a straight line. So I'd recommend at least starting with a damped track. So let's get that back to where we were. Now what I'd also do, because you'll notice now it's kind of off center, yeah? I'd create a empty as a target point, yeah? So I'm going to create this, we'll use a cone just so it's easier to spot, make it bigger. Kind of want it pointing upwards. There we go. Cool. So there's our little target empty. It's still too big. It doesn't need to be that big. And what I'll do is parent this. So I'm going to, with the new empty selected, I'm going to hold shift, left click the main control empty, and then press Control P, parent to object. So now as I move the, well, I can just run the animation, you'll notice the cone sticks with the ship like it's supposed to. Yeah. In fact, one slight issue just noticed, because we started with some rotation, it's kind of off, isn't it? Yeah, close enough. It doesn't really make a difference. I'm just being a bit OCD about it. But there you go. Now, what this will allow us to do, if I take our camera, jump back to our constraint here, and change the object to be this new empty, I can now move this empty to control the camera, but it will stay relative to where it is. So let's just kind of go there, because that's a nice sort of starting point, isn't it? And I'm going to keyframe this now, so just the location we need. And then as this moves on, we could even kind of move it a little bit here just to give us a different angle. And then hit location again. I'm going to change that to vector as well so we don't get those curves. Yeah, that's looking pretty cool. What I might do, actually, is jump to our control frame and jump to this last keyframe on frame 240, and then just move the ship a bit further by pressing G and Y again, and just move it a little bit further, maybe to something like that. That looks like a typical kind of Star Trek-y thing. And then I'll hit I again and hit location. So now we have this relatively nice, very typical Star Trek kind of flyby. And that is it for basics. If I press play now, you've literally got the animation exactly how you need it. You can certainly make it more interesting. You could throw in things like all sorts of things. Camera shake, a bit of manual rotation. So let's do that. So with the camera selected, you'll notice there's no keyframes on the camera. We're still only using that constraint to animate the camera, but we can add keyframes to it. So if I just rotate that just slightly and create a new keyframe, and then jump towards the end and rotate it a little bit that way, change these to vector as well, just gives us a slightly different result. Makes the camera look a bit less static. Nice. Another thing you could also do, this is getting a little bit complex, but you could parent the camera to this empty so it moves with the ship, and then animate the camera to go down that way and get the flyby that way, but keeping the camera relative to the ship. That might be useful if your animation's a bit more complicated than what we've just done here. But as a starting point, at least, that is the basics of animation, and the basics of how to animate a starship. Okay, now we're going to be getting a little bit more bold with the stuff we're doing. So I'm going to leave this camera as it is, but we're going to be creating a new shot now. So let's add in another camera. We'll call this camera 2. And I'm going to set our scene. If we go to scene properties, our current camera is camera 2. And now I'll just kind of, plonk it here. Okay, let's load up the Defiant, or re-enable the Defiant, this lovely ship here. And we need to give this a starting position. So I'm going to put this about here, facing that way. Now you'll notice, as I'm panning out, we're losing stuff, and that's because these ships are to scale. They're really big items or objects. So what we need to do is actually adjust our viewport distance. So I'm going to press the N button, go to view, and I'm just going to turn this to, 5,000. You see we can see further now. Cool. So what I want to do here is, as this ship's kind of flying along, I want the Defiant to zoom past it, but kind of curve underneath the ship like it's having to avoid it. And doing that manually by keyframes would be an absolute nightmare. So we're not going to do that. what I'm going to do, I just want to get the starting position right. In fact, no, we'll do that with the curve, because that's what we're going to use. We're going to use a curve to animate our ship. So, let me press Shift A and add in a... No, tell a lie. I want to press Shift S, cursor to selected. So the cursor is exactly where our starting point is for the ship. Then I'm going to add in a curve. Should I go with a path curve? I'm actually going to go with a Bezier. I find it works better. But yeah, we've now got this. If I tab into edit mode and scale up, we've got this Bezier curve that's been formed at the point of our starship here. However, what we want to do is, this will be the end position, so we'll move that out of the way. We want to grab this starting position, and I'm going to press Shift S and selection to cursor. So now our starting position is bang on the starting position of the Defiant. And then what I'm going to do is give it a finishing position, which is I'm going to have kind of up here, and maybe up. And then if I select both these curves by pressing A, and then right mouse button and subdivide, we'll get a new curve. And that one I'm going to kind of bend in about here, and maybe drag down. We're probably going to have to jiggle this about quite a bit before it will look exactly how we want it. Yeah, okay, cool. So, what we want to do now is I'm going to clear the rotation of our Defiant here. So, with the empty selected, press Alt-R, and that will clear the rotation. And instead, I'm going to use another constraint. Where's it gone? Follow path, which pretty much does what it says on the tin. So, I'm going to get the little eyedropper, click our path, and you'll notice it's buggered off all the way over there. Why has it done that? Well, it's because the object was here, and this is going to be relative to the start. So if I hit Alt-G to clear the location information, it goes back to there. Perfect. And then hopefully, as I animate, it does absolutely nothing. Why is that? It's because you want to use the offset. It looks like we've done the curve backwards, so we're going to be animating it backwards, but that's perfectly fine. So let me just tick follow curve, and then change this to -y, and there we go. It's starting to do what it's supposed to do. So now as I lower this offset, you see how the ship's following the curve but also changing the direction? That's what we want. It's now following the curve, which looks pretty cool. Okay, so on frame 1, I'm going to set a keyframe of this offset. I'm not going to set a keyframe on the object itself, but on the offset, because that's what's going to control it moving along the curve. So, set it back to 0. I'm just going to press I on with the mouse is hovering over offset, and it will turn yellow, and that means it's created a keyframe on that bit of data. And then I can jump to frame 240, and I can already see that we're going to want to move where this curve is. So let's just bring that to about, I don't know, there. And then we want to jump back to the constraint and set the offset to roughly the finishing position, which is there, and hit I. Like before, I'll press V and change the handle types to vector, so we've not got the easing going on. Yeah, it's already working. Cool. So, yeah, let's just see how this plays out as we play it. So, the ship's flying along. It's going to collide, which isn't what we want. So, I've got it to the point where we've got a problem. I'm clicking on the curve again. I'm pressing tab. I'm going to I'm going to grab the middle control point there and just lower it just enough so our little Defiant doesn't kill itself. And I'll probably also bring this in a bit more and lower it a little bit. Oh, not too far. Just to about there. Let's see how that looks now. Ooh. Not too bad. Not too bad. Okay, let me just jump back to 1 and I'll press play. Hey. Nice. Okay, now what we want to do is create a bit of rotation. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can... Ooh, what's the button? Curve, transform, rotate. No. Tilt. It's tilt. Transform, tilt. No. Curve tilt. Not clear. I want it to... Sorry, I'm having trouble remembering the button. Control points tilt. I bet it's Control T. Sorry about that. Control T. And that allows you to rotate a curve point. However, I'm not sure if that's actually going to work for us. Let me have a look. Control T. Yeah. So, when you've got a follow... to explain what's going on there, because I wasn't really making much sense. Each one of these points can have a tilt. Okay? And the rotation of the object following it will follow the tilt. So, if I wanted the Defiant to kind of do that as it's going through the curve, I can do just that. And if I wanted the starting point to be a bit more kind of there, that's fine. So then it flies through there, zooms up, and then all we've got to do is adjust this last control point. Control T. About there. Yeah, now it looks much more natural. Okay, so all we have left to sort now is the camera, really, for this. So what do we want to do? Because just if we jump back to our original scene camera at the moment, that should be quite amusing, but not particularly useful. But yeah, you see a Defiant kind of flying past, which yeah, not the most interesting shot. So let's jump back to camera 2 and decide what sort of shot we want. And I'm thinking, let's add one more potential skill to the skill set here for you. I'm just going to line this up to about here, close into the Defiant, and I'm going to press Control-Alt-0, and I'm going to change the camera's focal length to something like 30. Oop. Rotate this around and look up. Okay, so that's going to be kind of the starting position that I want for this. And I'm going to create a keyframe for it in a moment. But first, I want to parent it to the Defiant. So where is our actual camera? It's just behind there, see? So, Control-P. Keep transform. And then I'll select the camera and create a rotation. Cool. So now what's going to happen is as I move, the camera is staying with the Defiant, you see? Like so. However, we can make this more interesting. So, if I, let's say, jump ahead to about there, and I'm going to try and bring this camera down a bit. I can't get a good angle from here. That's cool. That's cool. In fact, let's do something a little different. So, I'm going to start with the camera kind of facing here. And then I'll hit location and rotation. Jump to about this point. And then go location and rotation. I actually don't need the location, but oh well. I'm just fixing it, sorry. Okay, so rotation, jump to about 75. Look up at our little target there. See how that looks. Now notice I'm using smoothing here. I haven't changed the handle type. It's because I want it to smooth in. And then it's focusing on here. So at about this point, let's bring it back to about there. And then as it passes here, we could even get it to look up like that. That's going to be way too hectic. But you'll get the idea. So, yeah, if I hit play now, it's kind of, we're doing this cool woof, following the ship. Oh, what's going on? It's going to hit. No. Oh, we're okay. Cool. That's not too bad, is it? Let me just say, if I turn on the what's it called, the material preview for a second, and change it to use the scene world, like so, and the scene lights. Now it'll do its best to kind of do this with Eevee, so we can get a slightly better idea of what it's going to look like when we render it out in cycles. So hit play. It's kind of looking up. It's like, oh, there's the Enterprise. Yeah, let's go in for an attack. And then pans out. Cool. Very funky. Now, there's definitely more to get into, but I didn't want this video to run away with me in terms of length. So, yeah, just to summarize, you've learned basic keyframe animation, and also how to use a curve to guide animation, as well as the handle types and some of the constraints that you'll want to commonly use. I guess we'll leave it there for today, but I'd love to hear what other things you'd like to see. I've been doing a lot of work lately with this sort of thing, making some fun little animations. So if you want to see weapon effects or shield effects or warping in and out, or like the FTL jump in from like Battlestar or whatnot, I've been working on all of those. So yeah, let me know how you get on and anything you create. I'd love to see. And I will talk to you next time.